A glimpse of then. Let's take a breath together. In through the nose and out. Tonight's story begins not with an emperor, nor with a battle, but with a pair of sandals, too worn for war, and a man whose name you'll forget by morning, though something about him might feel strangely familiar. Long ago, or maybe not so long at all, depending on how time sits in your mind. There was a place called Columbria. It never made it into the great books of Roman conquest, and you would not find its name carved into marble or sung in poems. It was a town at the far edge of the empire, closer to the sea than to the Senate, where goats outnumbered soldiers and gossip spread faster than news. A place with no claim to greatness, and that, perhaps, was its gift. The streets of Columbria weren't paved in marble, but in packed earth that turned to soft clay in the winter rains. The roofs leaked when it rained sideways, which was often, and the air always scented with something. Wood smoke, sheep, or occasionally, burnt figs from the market stall no one liked to mention by name. Most days in Columbria passed the same way. The sun rose, cats argued, vendors shouted, and old men adjusted their backs on wooden benches, each believing he alone understood how the empire truly worked. But every now and then, if you woke up just early enough before the birds, before the carts, before the town stretched its arms, you might catch a glimpse of something ancient and oddly tender. A man named Decimus Rufio walked those streets barefoot, not because he believed in grounding, or even because he was poor, though that was often debated, but because he liked the feel of the earth, even when it bites. He'd say he owned the town's only public bathhouse, a humble, soot-streaked stone building whose fires were never quite warm enough, and whose ceiling creaked just enough to make people whisper prayers mid-soak. And every morning, before the smoke had fully risen, Decimus would stand outside with a wooden bucket and say to no one in particular, "One day, I'll leave this town." Then he would yawn, scratch behind his ear, and unlock the bathhouse door again, just like he did the day before. Some folks say they'd be senators if they lived back then. Others like to think they'd be gladiators. I think most of us would have just been tired, with sore feet and too many chores before breakfast. And honestly, there's a kind of dignity in that. Back in Columbria, the firewood for the baths never stacked itself, and this particular morning, the clouds hung low over the rooftops like they, too, were tired of pretending to be majestic. As Decimus carried a bundle of kindling through the bathhouse arch, a small goat named Augustus trailed behind him. Bleating in judgment, Augustus wasn't his goat. Technically, it belonged to the baker next door, or maybe to no one. The town had long accepted that the goat was its own citizen, occasionally contributing by stealing radishes or interrupting funerals. "Don't you have somewhere regal to be?" Decimus muttered. Augustus replied by nibbling on his tunic. The bathhouse groaned awake, not unlike a man stretching after too little sleep. The stones underfoot were slick with dew, the woodpile damp, the stove cold, and yet there was a calm here, a quiet ritual. Decimus lit the first flame, small as a coin. It flickered, coughed, then steadied. Soon, warmth would creep through the underground channels, steam would rise, grumbles would soften, and Columbria's people would gather, not for luxury, not like the grand marble baths of Rome, but for something else. For routine, for heat, for something familiar that didn't ask too much. Sometimes, Sam says, gently now, comfort doesn't come in cushions or gold. It comes in the sound of hot water hissing on stone, in a towel that still smells like soap, or in a goat who shows up, even when you wish he wouldn't. Back in the bathhouse, Decimus watched the fire grow. The light danced on his weathered face. His hands, scarred from years of labor, were still steady, still capable. The ceiling creaked again. The wind tapped at the shutters. Augustus sneezed on the welcome mat. And just as the town began to stir boots in mud, bells on carts, Decimus whispered to himself, "Just one more day." Sam returns, his voice nearly a whisper. "Sleep well, traveller. We've only just arrived. Tomorrow, we'll meet the bathhouse regulars, and maybe find out who's been stealing the rosemary from the herb wall. But for now, let the bathhouse flicker in your thoughts, and let the steam carry you, gently, into the night." Segment 3. Meet Decimus, tone, intimate, earthy, gently humorous. Function, deep in connection with the protagonist through rhythm of daily life. Setting, early morning in Columbria, Roman bathhouse interior. Some mornings, Decimus didn't feel like getting up, but neither did the firewood. And between the two, at least he could talk the firewood into doing its job. Let me tell you what a day in his life looked like. The bathhouse of Columbria was not grand. It tilted slightly east, had a door that squeaked like a tired chicken, and a roof that dripped in exactly 3 places, one of which was directly over the hot stone bench, much to the irritation of Marius the fishmonger. But Decimus loved it, not in the way one might love a person or a prize chariot, more like how one loves an old sandal cracked. Familiar, slightly offensive in smell, but reliable. He had inherited it from an uncle no one liked, and whose name had long since evaporated from local memory. The man had vanished during a tax audit or possibly during a tavern bet involving fermented honey and a donkey. Stories varied. Still, the bathhouse remained, so did Decimus. Every day, before the second rooster crowed because the first one was always wrong, Decimus would light the fires, open the vents, and begin talking softly to the walls. "All right, old bones," he'd murmur to the structure. "Today we stay standing." Yes. No one ever answered, except perhaps the occasional echo, and once, suspiciously, the goat. By the time steam began curling from the floor stones, Marcus would appear. Marcus was what one might generously call a helper. More accurately, he was an older cousin of Decimus who had nowhere else to be. He wore the same robe daily, rarely blinked, and swore the bathhouse was built atop cursed salt. Salt doesn't curse people. Decimus once told him. "Ah," Marcus replied, "you've never stubbed your toe barefoot on salted steps." Together, they made a peculiar team. The bathhouse wasn't large, just 3 rooms. The tepidarium, where things started lukewarm and hopeful. The caldarium, where steam was thick enough to lose a friend in. And a tiny frigidarium that doubled as a fish storage closet during festivals. People came not just to clean, but to connect, to complain, to soak aches and inflate memories. There was Lydia, the widow who told fortunes with basil leaves and collected gossip with the precision of a trained spy. There was Marius, who smelled of seaweed even on rest days, and swore the emperor himself once bought fish from his uncle, a lie so old it had started to wrinkle. And then there was Gala, the herbalist with hands like stone and a heart like soup. She had treated half the town's ailments, though her cures often came with unsolicited advice and a strong smell of boiled mint. You know the type of place where you learn everyone's business whether you want to or not, where the water's not always warm, but the conversations somehow are. Decimus moved through the rooms like a conductor, adjusting heat, listening to creaks, and politely ignoring the ongoing debate between Lydia and Marius over whether olives were better raw or salted in goat tears. He wasn't a talker by nature, but people talked around him, and over time, he became something of a fixture like the bench that squeaked, or the crack on the 3rd tile. He knew every stone in the floor, every soot smudge in the corner, and every trick to keeping the heat just long enough for someone to say, "Ah, that's the spot." But what he didn't know, what no one knew, was that something was about to change. And it started with a whisper in the wood. That morning, while checking the storage alcove for soapstone, Decimus noticed a strange draft, a cold thread of air near the wall where no wall should have leaked. He pressed his ear gently against the wooden beam. Silence, then in a soft creak, a knot in the wood that pulsed just slightly. He leaned back, squinted, shrugged. Probably nothing. Or termites, or ghosts. Marcus would be delighted. "What's wrong with that face?" Marcus asked, appearing behind him like a startled owl. Did the soap try to talk back? "Just the wind," Decimus replied. "The wind," Marcus nodded. "Or prophecy." And just like that, a normal morning carried a wrinkle, the kind of wrinkle that might mean nothing, or everything. But for now, the fire still needed stoking, and the goat had knocked over the water bucket. Again, outside, the town of Columbria was waking. A dog barked. A boy shouted about pears. Somewhere, a door slammed in disagreement. Inside, Decimus wiped his hands on his tunic and looked around. The steam was rising, just enough to blur the corners of the room. It looked peaceful, as if the walls themselves had exhaled. He took a seat on the warmest bench, leaned back, and let the heat soak into his shoulders. For one moment, one perfect sliver of time, there was nothing but warmth, stone, and breath. Maybe you wouldn't last a day in the Roman Empire, but you might just survive one morning, in Decimus's shoes, just long enough to light the fire and hear a secret you weren't supposed to hear. The heat beneath the stones. There's a kind of magic in steam, not the flashy, fire from fingers kind, but the slow, rising kind, the kind that carries memory in every curl. When Decimus first inherited the bathhouse, he knew nothing about thermodynamics. That word hadn't been invented yet, and even if it had, it probably would have scared him off. What he knew was this: fire plus time equals warmth, and warmth, if you did it right, meant trust. The bathhouse worked because of an old Roman trick. Beneath the floors, there were hollow spaces, like little tunnels for heat to dance through. Fires lit in the lower chamber, tended by Decimus, and sometimes Marcus, when he wasn't discussing salted curses, would heat the stones above. It was ancient and clever, and loud. Some mornings, the floor would moan like an old man waking too fast. The pipes would knock in strange rhythms, as if arguing about who was late. And the steam, once it started rolling in, would wrap the entire space like a slow, sleepy hug. Some folks say modern spas are better. They've clearly never seen a goat navigate steam like a ghost in sandals. Because, yes, Augustus was there. Again. He had snuck into the bathhouse while Decimus was stoking the furnace. No one saw him enter. No one heard him. But when Galla arrived with her basket of herbs, he was already lying on the warm tile, legs folded like a royal statue. I'm beginning to think he owns the place. Galla muttered. Do not tell him that. Decimus replied. He'll raise the rent. People began to file in. Elidia, shawl wrapped tight, muttering to her Basil about dreams she'd had of fish on ladders. Marius, still arguing about the tax on eel licenses no one could confirm existed. Aurelio, who never said a word, but always brought figs, one of which he'd placed gently on the windowsill for the house. They knew each other's routines, who liked the hotter corner, who hated wet sandals, who needed an extra towel for their knees. No one had to ask. They just knew. It was a rhythm, a ritual, a sleepy, steamy orchestra of breath and water and soft conversation. It wasn't grand. It wasn't marble, but it worked. And sometimes, the places that work don't need to be more than warm and waiting. Marcus shuffled in late, as usual, holding a broom he hadn't used yet, and a theory he was eager to share. I think the ceiling is sinking. It's always been that low. Decimus said, that's what the ceiling wants you to think. A small chuckle spread through the room. Not loud, just enough to ripple across the steam. Galla began her usual task, placing bundles of rosemary and thyme above the hot stones. As the scent released, Lydia sighed. You could sell this smell in little jars. Call it Not Dine Today and make a fortune. And then came the question. It came almost every day, from someone sometimes joking, sometimes not. Do you think Rome even remembers we're here? There was no answer. Some shrugged. Some didn't look up. Some smiled. Because what else can you do when a question is bigger than your ceiling? That morning, the draft near the back wall returned. Subtle, just a kiss of cold air against Decimus's neck. He paused mid-step, stared at the stone. A crack, maybe a loose vent. He knelt, touched the wall. Nothing. But as he stood, he caught Marcus watching him a little too closely. Do you feel it too? Marcus asked. Feel what? That something's hiding in the walls. Termites. Worse. Bureaucracy. See. The people of Columbria had lived long enough to know that mystery wasn't always dragons or treasure. Sometimes it was just a draft where there shouldn't be one, or a whisper behind a wall, or a goat who stared too long at empty space. Later that day, Decimus would check again, and again. But for now, the bathhouse was full of steam, of half-told stories and unfinished jokes, of figskins on windowsills and herbs drying on rope. And as the sun climbed high enough to touch the clay roofs, Augustus the goat let out a satisfied sneeze, a sign, apparently, that the heat had reached its ideal level. Decimus sat back, towel on his lap, and let the room hum around him. He didn't know that tomorrow everything would shift, But for now, the heat beneath the stones was just right. Sleep sound. Friend, let the warmth stay with you, because in the next chapter, a very serious man with very silly shoes is about to arrive. And he's bringing regulations, a visit from the inspector. Every quiet place eventually gets a knock on the door. Sometimes it's opportunity, sometimes it's your cousin asking for soup, and sometimes it's Rome. The first sign of trouble came not with a trumpet, but with dust, kicked up by polished sandals that had clearly never met real dirt. He arrived just after midday when the sun had grown lazy, and most of Columbria preferred shadows and naps. His chariot was far too clean, his robe far too stiff, and his scroll case embossed, crested, and undeniably loud clinked with the sound of bad news. "He's got a scroll case," whispered Lydia. "And a belt," added Marius. "And cheekbones sharp enough to slice pears," Gala muttered. The inspector had arrived. His name was Lucien Pavo, and though he barely stood taller than a bath bucket, he carried himself like Jupiter's tax accountant. Decimus met him at the bathhouse door, towel slung over one shoulder, sandals damp, goat behind him. Lucien did not bow. Instead, he squinted the way a man squints when trying to decide whether the smell is thyme or mildew. "Is this the official public bathing establishment of Columbria?" he asked, voice pinched like his collar. "It's a bathhouse," Decimus replied. "Good. Because I have forms." Lucien had the voice of a man raised by spreadsheets, and the heart of someone who had never let his feet touch the floor without slippers. The townspeople watched from benches, towels wrapped like togas, steam curling around their faces. Lucien unfurled a scroll as long as his arm. Ink. Seals. So many checkboxes. According to Decree 77, subsection B, line 4, all provincial bathing facilities must submit to a quarterly inspection for structural integrity, heat regulation, and approved odor levels. Odor levels, Marcus asked. "I assure you, sir, our goat meets all olfactory standards," Lydia added. Deadpan, Lucien didn't blink. He produced a small brass tool shaped like a tiny pitchfork and began tapping the stone wall. Tap, tap, tap. Scribble, tap, pause, sniff, frown, scribble. He muttered to himself. Wall curvature within acceptable tilt. Steam density, moderate. Herb saturation, possibly over oreganoed. Some say sleep comes when the mind is quiet. Others say it comes when bureaucracy enters the room. I say, let's test both theories at once. Lucien marched to the caldarium, poked a measuring rod into the steam. Too much rosemary. Borderline intoxicating. Gala stood up. "That's the point. Also," Lucien added, "there appears to be a goat in the facility." "He's an emotional support goat," Marcus said. Straight-faced, he helps regulate anxiety during extreme steaming. Lucien wrote something furiously. The pen squeaked. Then he turned, pointed at the back wall. "What is this crack?" Everyone looked. It was barely visible, just a slender line near the stone bench. But Lucien had found it. Of course he had. Could be old age. Decimus offered, "Yours or the wall's?" Lucien replied, not looking up. "It's strange how a crack in the wall can feel like a crack in everything. Even if you pretend not to care, it lingers." Lucien finished his inspection with the speed of a man who hated steam. He handed Decimus a wax-stamped scroll with 17 items circled in red. "You have 5 days to correct these violations, or the bathhouse will be closed pending imperial review." "By whom?" Decimus asked. "A more senior inspector. That exists." Lucien stared, flat as papyrus. Then he left sandals clicking, robe still unwrinkled, scroll case swinging like a verdict. And just like that, the bathhouse had a deadline, and Decimus had a headache. The group sat in silence for a while. The steam hissed, the goat yawned. Then Lydia cleared her throat. "I once seduced a tax official with nothing but figs and sarcasm. Want me to give it a go? Let's try patching the wall first," Gala said. Decimus stared at the list in his hands. Structural reinforcement, ceiling recalibration, herb intensity calibration. He looked up. "How do you calibrate oregano?" Marcus shrugged. "Faith and tweezers. Sleep doesn't always come easy, especially when someone threatens the only warm place in your town. But tomorrow, the town will gather. and you'll see what a patchwork crew of fishmongers, widows, and herbalists can do when Rome comes knocking. Bread, games, and blisters. Columbria might not have had armies, or senators, or even dependable spoons, but it had people, and when the bathhouse was threatened, the people showed up. The day after Lucien Pavot and his unforgiving scroll made their exit, something unusual happened. The townspeople, those who normally move through life with the slow certainty of soup simmering, gathered in the square before breakfast. Marius brought fish, Galla brought herbs, Marcus brought blue chalk and an empty bucket. No one asked. He seemed to know what he was doing. Decimus stood by the bathhouse steps, arms crossed, towel still over one shoulder. "We don't need to make a scene," he said. "Rome doesn't like scenes. Neither do I." Lydia replied, "But I do like steam. And I hate mold. And if we lose this place, I'll have to soak my knees in puddles. And I won't be explaining foot fungus to the entire town again," Galla added. So, like clockwork built from clay and stubbornness, the bathhouse brigade got to work. Marius climbed the roof to inspect the leak. He immediately slipped and landed on Augustus, who took offense and wandered off to chew on a nearby law scroll. "That was the ceiling inspection," Marius muttered, holding his elbow. Inside, the crack in the wall had grown, or at least, it seemed that way. Marcus placed his hand on it reverently. "She speaks. She needs plaster," Galla replied, handing him a bucket. "There's something beautiful about people fixing something together, even if they're not sure what they're doing." Especially then, Lydia fetched her nephew a boy who'd once been banned from the forum for playing dice with a chicken. He now used that same chicken to measure floor vibrations. "He says the foundation is stable," Lydia translated. "The chicken's confident." "Good enough for me," Decimus said. They patched the walls, scrubbed the stones, aired the vent pipes with bellows borrowed from the blacksmith. Galla recalibrated the herbs by holding up each sprig to the morning light and asking, "Too sassy?" Or just enough? Even Augustus helped dragging a rope from one end of the bathhouse to the other. No one knew why, but it looked productive. And then came the most important task of all, releveling the floor stones, a job that required patience, balance, and apparently bread. Decimus asked. "To kneel on," Lydia said, already unwrapping 2 flat loaves. "We could use cushions. This is a Roman bathhouse. We suffer with dignity." So they knelt on bread, held their breath, adjusted stones by fractions of inches, argued about which way up was, and somehow managed. By mid-afternoon, the floor shone, the walls were patched, the herbs were gentle enough to please a regulation-loving goat, and Augustus had fallen asleep in the exact center of the tepidarium, a sure sign, according to Marcus, that the energy was balanced. "It's as perfect as it ever was," Galla said, wiping her hands. "Which means Rome will hate it, but will love it," Decimus replied. That night, instead of closing the doors early, they held a quiet celebration, not loud, not with music, but with bread, figs, warm stones, and the kind of laughter that comes after shared work. No one made speeches, but Marcus stood and declared, "If the inspector returns, we show him the goat first. That'll soften him." Everyone agreed, including Augustus, who sneezed politely. Sometimes, saving a place doesn't mean building it new. It means noticing what already works and holding onto it with both hands, even if those hands smell like fish and rosemary. As the moon rose over Columbria, the bathhouse glowed from within, not just from heat, but from the hum of belonging. Decimus sat on the bench by the entrance, towel still damp, elbows on knees. He looked around, quietly proud. He didn't say much, but the look in his eyes said what needed saying. "This is worth keeping. Tomorrow, the inspector may return, or he may not, but tonight the bathhouse breathes easy, and the people who built it together sleep with tired muscles and warm hearts. Dreams of running water. There's something about the way water moves in dreams. It doesn't splash. It whispers. And when a man like Decimus dreams of water, he is not simply resting. He is remembering. The bathhouse had quieted. Even the steam seemed to move slower now, curling in graceful loops that clung to the stone walls like lullabies. The last lantern burned low. The echo of footsteps had faded. The people of Columbria were tucked in their homes, wrapped in wool, heads heavy with the soft satisfaction of work well done. And Decimus, at long last, had allowed himself to lie down. He did not own a bed. Exactly, not in the traditional sense. Instead, he kept a long, woven mat tucked behind the caldarium, where the floor was warmest and the ceiling dripped just slow enough to lull a man to sleep. Tonight, the warmth was just right, and so he dreamed. The dream began, as it always did, with a trickle, a stream, clear, cool, winding through cypress trees that swayed without wind. His feet were bare, the earth beneath him was soft, forgiving. The sun overhead glowed golden, but never burned. He wasn't in Columbria. He was somewhere older, somewhere deeper. A Roman villa, perhaps, but not one he had ever seen. Columns rose out of the grass like fingers. Birds sang names he couldn't quite remember. And the water moved like it had a secret. He followed it. Down past stone arches, through rooms with no roofs, past women in linen robes who smiled but said nothing. He knew this wasn't real, and yet it felt more real than memory. In the dream, Decimus reached a courtyard where water spilled from a lion's mouth, not roaring, but laughing. He touched the fountain, and it hummed. A voice neither man nor woman spoke from the water. "You must keep the heat steady." He frowned. "I do." "No, in here." The voice echoed from his chest. Even the best bathhouse cannot hold warmth if the man who runs it forgets why he began. Dreams don't always make sense, but sometimes they remind us of the questions we've stopped asking. Suddenly, the dream changed. The water stopped flowing. The ground beneath him chilled. The fountain cracked, and out stepped Lucian Pavo, still holding his scroll case. But this time, he wore sandals made of smoke. "Violation 79, Lucian announced. Unapproved warmth of soul. Decimus tried to speak, tried to argue. But his mouth was full of steam, and Augustus the goat floated past, wearing a senator's cloak and chewing an official document. He woke with a start. The lantern beside him had burned out. The bathhouse was silent, save for the soft hiss of settling stones. His heart beat faster than usual, not from fear, but from recognition. There was something in the dream. Something he couldn't shake. He sat up slowly, rubbing his face. The air was warm. The mat beneath him was dry, but the whisper of water still lingered in his ears. Even in dreams, we carry our burdens, and sometimes the dreams carry something back. Decimus rose, quietly, barefoot. He walked to the caldarium, steam now faint, almost reverent. He ran his hand along the wall where the crack had been patched. It held, but he still felt that draft, that subtle breath of something just beneath the stone. Not dangerous, not loud, but there, waiting. He looked around at the quiet space benches. Herbs, towels folded with care. It wasn't perfect, but it was his. He whispered to no one. "I began because I needed to feel useful. I stayed because they needed it. But I think I love it now." Outside, a breeze rattled the shutters. Inside, Augustus stirred in his sleep, snoring like a kettle, and Decimus tired. Full of warmth and confusion, settled back onto the mat, not to escape the dream, but to follow it tonight. If you're lucky, your dreams might carry a little warmth from Columbria too, and if a goat in a cloak appears, you're right where you need to be. Soft chuckle, sleep well. Traveller, tomorrow, a storm rolls in. Rain on Roman roads. There's a sound to Roman rain, not like the thunder of storms in the mountains, not like the hurried slap of city gutters, but softer, like coins falling in slow motion, like memory trying to return. It rained the next morning. Not a grand storm, no lightning or floods, just a gentle, steady drizzle that coated the terracotta roofs of Columbria in a silver sheen. The sky hung low, like it hadn't finished waking up. The goats refused to leave their sheds, and even the pigeons blinked slowly, wings damp, unimpressed with the weather's ambition. Inside the bathhouse, it was warm. It always was, thanks to the furnace and the rhythm Decimus had long mastered. But this morning, something felt shifted. Some mornings, it's not what changes that matters. It's that something has. Marcus arrived early, which was strange. He stood by the door, holding a clay cup and a chunk of bread, looking at the rain like it had just personally betrayed him. It's the kind of rain that brings thoughts, he muttered. You ever notice that? Rain brings leaks, Decimus replied, checking the ceiling. Thoughts are optional. The bathhouse had its own sound in the rain. The drops pattered on the roof tiles, rolled off the edges, landed with soft ticks against the stone below. The cracks in the walls old, patched, or imagined hissed a little more than usual. Lydia arrived next, cloak pulled tight around her shoulders, cheeks pink from the damp air. Feels like the kind of day where something forgotten knocks on your door. Hopefully it's not Lucian again, Gala grumbled, stepping in with a basket of citrus peels. The crowd today was smaller. Rain always did that. Only the diehards came out on days like this. The ones with joint pain that flared in cold. The ones who preferred their silence to be filled with steam rather than solitude. They spoke less, moved slower, but there was peace in it. Marius fell asleep upright on the hot bench, snoring softly. Lydia braided rosemary into the herb rack with fingers that moved like old poetry. Even Augustus stayed curled up near the warmest stone, ears twitching but eyes closed. Some places are louder in silence, and some people say more when they say nothing at all. Decimus sat quietly near the caldarium wall, the one with the repaired crack. It held, but the draft still whispered, like a story that hadn't found its ending. He didn't mind. Sometimes, he thought, things are meant to stay slightly unfinished. That's how they breathe. The rain continued. Outside, puddles formed in the uneven bricks of the Forum Square. Raindrops fell into the water and made tiny crowns. And far off beyond even the hills that cradled Columbria, the empire carried on. Senators argued, merchants shouted, ships moved across grey seas. But here, inside this little bathhouse at the edge of forgotten maps, people breathed. Together, it's easy to forget how ancient comfort can be, how deep the roots of routine reach. A warm room, a familiar bench, a towel that still smells like lemon and thyme. Decimus stood and walked to the door. He opened it just a little and watched the rain. It smelled clean, earthy, and for a second, he remembered being 10 years old, barefoot, racing through puddles near his uncle's vineyard, grapes bursting underfoot. That boy felt far away now, but not lost. He closed the door again. The warmth greeted him like an old friend. Sleep, friend. Let the rain fall where it may. Let the bathhouse hold you stone and steam and story. And when you dream, follow the trickle. It knows the way. Segment Ipshan. The second visit. 1. See words. Function. Return of conflict with a twist. Reintroduce Lucian Pavo with unexpected softness. Reinforce theme. Small kindnesses can outlast empire. Tone. 1. Surprising. Sleep-friendly tension gently diffused. Touches of subtle humor and emotional payoff. Sometimes the people who leave the strongest impressions are the ones who don't smile easily. And sometimes they come back, not with punishment, but with a pause. 3 days had passed since the rain. Columbria had dried up like a loaf left too close to the sun. The bathhouse, on the other hand, had thrived. The steam was steadier. The walls smelled of new plaster and citrus. The bench under the western window no longer wobbled. Augustus, the goat, had developed an unexpected interest in sitting on folded towels, preferably ones just warmed. Even Marcus looked almost satisfied. Almost. And then, right around the hour when bread was still soft, but olives were too salty, he returned. Lucian Pavo, still dressed in the same robes, still polished like marble, still squinting, though it was perfectly overcast, but this time, something was different. He arrived on foot, no scroll case, no entourage, just Lucian and a small satchel. Even the wind held its breath. Decimus stepped outside. No one else dared. Not yet. Inspector, he said. Careful. Lucian nodded. Citizen. Then, silence. Lucian looked up at the building. His lips pressed together as if debating whether or not to frown. You fixed the herb rack. We calibrated oregano. Decimus replied. Deadpan. Lucian almost smiled. Almost. Inside. The townsfolk pretended not to be watching. Marius rearranged fish that didn't need rearranging. Lydia shuffled her basil leaves like they were oracle cards. Marcus hummed one note under his breath, just loud enough to be ominous. Lucian walked in slowly. He removed his sandals at the threshold. That alone made every eyebrow in the room lift a few centimeters. Something about bare feet makes even the sternest of men human, especially when the floor is a little warmer than expected. Lucian sat, not like a guest, not like an emperor. He sat like someone who wanted to remember something. I was born near Neapolis. He said to no one in particular. There was a bathhouse down the road, smaller than this, less. Goat. Augustus snorted gently, unimpressed. Lucian continued. My grandfather used to take me, said the heat pulled the lies out of your joints. No one spoke. Even Galla, halfway through tying bundles of mint, paused. Lucian leaned back. Let the steam rise. I wrote the regulations for goat entry. You know, he murmured. Never thought I'd break them. Technically, he's freelance. Marcus offered. For the next 20 minutes, no words passed. Just breath, just warmth, the hiss of stones, the faint plink of a droplet from the roof beam. Lucian closed his eyes, and for the first time, the town saw what he looked like without armor and realized he was not much older than some of them, but carried weight like someone 3 decades deep. He finally spoke again. I will submit the report. No penalties. Your compliance is sufficient. Decimus nodded, unsure what to say. Why the change? Lydia finally asked. Sharp as always, Lucian looked around. Because something about this place stayed with me. After I left, it was the heat, I thought, but it wasn't. It was the people. It was how nothing here pretends to be perfect. It just works. There's a kind of peace that can't be built by blueprints, only by hands and time and tea shared across old benches. Lucian rose. The steam had softened his face. Or maybe the words had. He picked up his satchel, nodded once, and walked out. No sandals, just quiet footsteps on stone. As the door closed, Galla exhaled. Well, that was strange. He didn't once mention mildew. Decimus replied. He's healing, Lydia said, as if diagnosing a ghost. Marcus added, if he comes back barefoot again, we charge him double. That night, Decimus sat beside the furnace, eyes half closed, sipping lukewarm mint water. Outside, the stars hung lower than usual. Inside, the air smelled like stone and time and something else. Forgiveness. Maybe, or freedom. The empire will go on. So will its scrolls and inspectors. But Columbria will sleep easy because it knows who it is. And sometimes, that's all we need. The secret in the wall. Every stone has a story. Every crack, a memory trying to come through. And sometimes, if you lean close enough, the wall finally speaks. It started, as it often did, with a draft. Late one afternoon, the steam in the caldarium curled in an odd way, as if nudged by a breath too cold to belong. Decimus noticed it. Again, he had grown used to the small chill at the back wall. It came and went, polite and persistent. But this time, there was a sound, a tiny knock, no more like a thud, then silence. Decimus paused his sweeping. Marcus looked up from sorting lint into jars. For reasons still unclear, tell me that was you. Decimus said. If it was, Marcus replied, I owe someone an apology. The townsfolk were summoned. Not urgently, Columbria didn't do urgency, but with that quiet, simmering curiosity that pulls neighbours from their chairs. Galla arrived with a chisel. Lydia brought preserved lemon slices. For morale, even Augustus sauntered in, sniffed the air, and sat directly facing the back wall like a furry oracle. Decimus traced his hand along the plaster. The patch was good, clean, but there just near the corner was a faint hollow echo. He tapped. Everyone leaned in. That is the sound, Galla declared, of something hiding. Treasure, Marius whispered. Hopefully, more likely mold. Marcus said, Treasure's shy cousin. You'd be amazed what a group of semi-retired bathers can accomplish when given a hammer and half a theory. With great care, they chipped away at the stone, not to destroy, just to listen, bit by bit. The plaster gave, the wall dust drifted, and then soft as a sigh, a loose brick shifted. Behind it, a small recess, dry, untouched, and inside that hollow, a wooden box, carved but worn. They all stared. Even Augustus blinked. Decimus reached in, lifted it out. It wasn't locked. just heavy with age. He opened it. Inside, wrapped in brittle linen, were a small bronze coin marked with a symbol none recognized, a folded letter written in Latin older than most of their grandparents, a ring engraved with a vine curling around a name Valeria. The letter was brought into the light. Lydia, whose eyes were still sharp from decades of deciphering handwriting worse than a chicken's footprint, read aloud, slowly, to the one who finds this bathhouse was built not just for warmth of body, but warmth of soul. My love, Gaius, carved the stones. I planted the thyme. Together, we left this for you. May you sit where we sat, breathe what we breathed, and may the heat carry our joy to you. Valeria, year of the seventh eagle. Silence, not stunned but hushed. The kind of silence that comes after a song ends, and no one quite wants to move. Marcus, of course, broke it. Well, that's lovely. And also mildly haunting. Galla wiped at her eye, muttering something about steam irritation. Decimus said nothing. He just held the letter close, carefully, as if the ink might still be drying. They had been there, before the goat, before the scrolls, before even the steam. Two people, in love, in heat, in history, and now they were part of the bathhouse again. They placed the ring in a small bowl near the entrance. Not on display, just present. The coin was tucked into a crevice in the wall, and the letter folded gently and placed inside the herb rack, where the warmth could kiss its corners. Later, that night, as Decimus cleaned up the last of the day's footprints, he found Marcus standing near the recess, staring at the patch of stone now reset. Do you think they were happy? Marcus asked. I think they were warm, Decimus said. Same thing. The night air was cool again, but the bathhouse felt warmer than ever. Not because of the fire, not even because of the company, but because the past had whispered and someone had listened. Sleep well tonight, for the walls around you may be older than your worries. And if you listen closely, they just might tell you you're not alone. A town worth remembering. Most places are known for their noise, their monuments, their famous names etched into history books. But some places are remembered because they made you feel known. Columbria was that kind of place. After the letter from Valeria, something shifted, not in the bathhouse that remained warm, cracked in the right places, scented with mint and thyme. But in the people, they moved slower. Yes, but with more purpose, more care. The benches were wiped not just for cleanliness, but out of respect. The herbs were bundled more gently, the goat spoken to more kindly. Even Marcus used a full sentence once before lunch. That's how deep the change went. One morning, Galla brought in a piece of carved wood. It's for the entryway, she said. A little plaque. It read, heat, heart, and history est. Nobody knows. They hung it right above the threshold. Crooked on purpose. Let the future fix it, Marius said. Columbria had no fame, no banner, but it had names. Names whispered in stories. Names carried in steam. Lydia began teaching younger villagers how to steep herbs with intention. Don't just boil the water. She'd say, invite it. Galla trained a small crew in the art of towel folding. No gracias. A proper towel must look like it's about to give you advice. And Decimus, he started writing things down. Small notes, observations, lessons from steam. One of them read, if you treat water with reverence, it'll reveal what the mind hides. Marcus, inspired by absolutely nothing in particular, built a pigeon perch near the roof. For surveillance, he claimed. For companionship, Galla corrected. Either way, the pigeons liked it. And they stayed. The bathhouse had become something more. Not just a building. Not just a business. It was a keeper of memory. It held laughter from last week and tears from 3 Februaries ago. It held the footprints of a boy who left for war and came back limping but alive. It held the handprint of a girl who once drew on the wall with soap and claimed she had signed the steam. History is not only what empires leave behind. Sometimes it's what small towns never let go of. The townsfolk began leaving little tokens in a quiet corner near the caldarium. A button from a soldier's coat, a dried fig from a mother's garden, a spoon bent at the handle with initials scratched in it, tea, They called it the corner of still things. Visitors didn't ask questions. Locals just nodded at it, like it was part of the wall, and maybe it was. One evening, long after sunset, Lucian Pavo returned. This time not as an inspector, not even as a guest. He carried a folded towel. Decimus nodded. "Come for the steam?" Lucian shook his head. "I came because I wanted to remember who I was before Rome handed me a pen." He sat in silence, placed the towel beside him, closed his eyes. Lydia brought him mint water. Without asking, Galla adjusted the bench. Marcus whispered something into the goat's ear, and Augustus miraculously did not object to the company. We think history is built by armies, but sometimes it's built by warm rooms, by people who remember your name even when you forget your own. That night, the bathhouse glowed. No celebration, no festival, just heat and breath and quiet. In the corner of still things, someone placed a fresh fig leaf. Tied to it was a note. For the next dreamer who needs to feel real, and in that warmth, Columbria was remembered. Not by scholars, not by stone tablets, but by hearts and dreams. Close your eyes. Let the heat find the corners of your day. And if you smell time in your sleep, maybe you're closer to Columbria than you think. Letters never sent. Some letters never find their way to hands. Some are written for no one and still heal everyone. In Columbria, there came a time when people started writing what they couldn't say. It began with Lydia, quietly. No announcement, no ceremony. One morning, after stirring thyme and honey into the herb water, she sat near the old folding bench, pulled out a thin piece of parchment, and began to write. Her hand trembled only slightly, not from age, but from memory. The letter wasn't long. It was addressed simply, "To my sister, who never left the coast." She folded it, pressed it between two smooth stones, and left it in the corner of still things. The next day, Galla left one too, scrawled on the back of a fish recipe, "Dear Papa, I forgive the silence." She folded it into the shape of a basil leaf and walked away. Words have weight, even when no one reads them, especially then. Soon, others followed. Marcus, who had claimed to dislike writing, left a letter sealed inside an olive pit. No one knew how. He refused to explain. Marius wrote one to a dog from his childhood. "You were the best listener I ever knew." Lucian Pavo left no letter, but he brought parchment, placed it silently in the center basket, and sat nearby, watching. Decimus took the longest, not because he didn't have things to say, but because he wasn't sure where to start. Until one evening, after the last towel had been folded, and Augustus had tucked himself near the warm stones, Decimus sat on the old stool by the vent and began to write. "To the father I never knew. You would have liked the heat here. You would have liked the people even more. I didn't build this place for you, but sometimes, I think, maybe I did." He didn't sign it. He didn't have to. Letters never sent, still travel, through steam, through stone, through the softness in our ribs. The corner of still things grew, not cluttered, never that, but rich, layered, quietly blooming with truths too fragile for speech. Visitors began to notice. They'd glance at the stack of folded notes, at the tokens beside them, a locket, a feather, a tiny drawing of someone dancing, and instead of asking, they'd leave something, too. One man from out of town, nameless, broad-shouldered, eyes like grey dusk, visited only once. He didn't enter the bathhouse. He stood at the doorway, removed his shoes, bowed once, and placed a folded handkerchief on the ground with the words, "To the one I couldn't carry." And then he walked away. You never know what someone holds, until they have a place soft enough to set it down. Columbria became known quietly as the town that listened. People came not for entertainment, nor spectacle, but for silence and steam, and perhaps space to say what had long been waiting. The bathhouse had always been warm, but now it was something more sacred. Not in the religious sense, but in the human one, where grief and joy and love and regret could float without judgment, where no one asked why you wept when the heat hit your chest, where writing to someone gone was understood as healing, not madness. Tonight, if there's a name you've held too long in your chest, let it come. Write them in your thoughts. Let the steam carry it. As the lanterns dimmed and the scent of rosemary faded into the corners, Decimus closed his eyes, thinking not of tomorrow, nor of law, nor even of stones, but of ink, and how light his hands had felt after letting go. The day the fire went out, every warm place has one cold day, a moment where the fire sputters, not to punish, but to reveal what warmth was really built from. It happened on a Thursday, not a dramatic one, just Thursday. The sky was pale, the breeze was indifferent, the pigeons cooed without conviction, and for the first time since anyone could remember, the fire beneath the bathhouse didn't catch. Decimus tried 3 times, checked the fuel, checked the airflow, checked the kindling. Nothing. No spark, no glow, just still air and a chill that pressed gently against the walls. When the flame rests, the soul listens harder. Word spread, as it always did in Columbria. Lydia arrived first, hands tucked into sleeves. Not scolding, just watching. Gala brought hot tea instead of towels. Marcus simply said, "Well, steam or not, we still have benches." They sat, in silence. The walls were colder than usual. Their breath showed in the air. Still, they stayed. Marius wrapped a wool scarf around Augustus the goat, who looked vaguely annoyed but didn't object. No one asked why the fire had failed. They just waited. Because they all knew heat was not the only thing that made this place. It was the rhythm, the gathering, the stories, the stillness, the shared weight of being alive. Decimus sat on the floor, back against the cold stones. His hands were raw from striking flint, but he looked around at the people who had come anyway and smiled. "Maybe," he said softly, "maybe the fire needed a day off." They all laughed, not loud, but real, and in that laugh, warmth returned. Not from flame, but from memory. Sometimes, when the fire goes out, you realize it was never the only thing keeping you warm. That day, instead of sweat and steam, they shared old stories. The last of the dried figs. A game involving who could remember the most absurd Roman laws Marcus won unfairly. And the silence that follows when people no longer need to speak to be understood. Lucian came by that afternoon. He stepped in, paused, raised an eyebrow at the lack of fog. Inspection. Reflection. Decimus replied. Lucian smiled. Approved. The sun dipped lower. The chill lingered. And then, just as the last lantern was being trimmed, a spark, a single, small flare from the hearth. No announcement, no roaring flame, just a whisper of red, followed by a low, slow burn. The fire returned. Not because someone forced it, but because the room had remembered what it was for. They didn't rush to stoke it. They let it build on its own. Let the warmth return, like an old friend knocking quietly, not needing to be greeted with fanfare. Just let in. That night, as Decimus swept the last of the day's dust, he looked at the glowing stones and whispered, "Thank you for the pause." The bathhouse creaked softly, as if nodding in reply. If tonight feels colder than usual, don't fear. Sometimes the stillness is simply space being made for warmth to return. The mosaic beneath the bench. Sometimes beauty hides just beneath where we've been sitting all our lives, and all it takes is for a bench to wobble. It started with a squeak. That kind of short, sharp sound a wooden bench makes when it has been moved too many times and finally decides to complain about it. Marcus was the first to notice. He stood, rubbed his back, then eyed the old bench against the north wall, the one near the towel rack, where Augustus liked to nap when no one was watching. "She's leaning to the left again," he muttered. "Everything leans in here." Gala replied, not looking up from her lemon peel folding, but the bench kept squeaking. Every time someone sat, every time someone shifted, until finally it gave up. With a soft clunk, the bench leg slid inward. No crash, no drama, just a quiet surrender. When they lifted it to check the damage, they found not wood rot, not dust, but color. Tiles, old, cracked, but unmistakably placed with care. And pattern, an intention, a mosaic. It wasn't a grand piece, not the kind you find in palaces or temples, but it was bright, and it was there. The colors were softened by time-burnt orange, dusty teal, faded ivory, but the shapes held. Vina. A sun, a spiral that could have been a fingerprint, or the tail of a cat chasing something unseen. They all crouched around it. Marius reached out, paused, then touched it softly as if afraid it might vanish. "Was this always here?" he whispered. "It's been here longer than us," Lydia said. "That's certain." They cleared the dust carefully. No scrubbing, just soft cloths and breath. More patterns emerged. A laughing face, a swirl of water, something that might have been a fig, or an eye, or both. Roman art is like dreams. It never tells you exactly what it is. It just waits for your own meaning to settle into the shape. The mosaic was only about 2 feet wide, but it reached deep not just into the floor, but into memory. Lucian, when shown, simply said, "I used to draw things like this. When I was young, before I learned how to write law, they didn't try to restore it, didn't call experts or post notices. They left it mostly as it was, but they placed a soft rug nearby, so people could sit beside it, not to stare, just to be close. Soon, it became a sort of ritual. Before entering the steam room, people would pause at the mosaic. Some would nod, some would whisper something. A few would press their fingers gently to one of the tiles. For luck, one girl said. For memory, her grandmother added. One afternoon, a boy visiting from a nearby village asked Decimus, "Did you make it?" Decimus shook his head. "It was waiting for us. That's the thing about forgotten beauty. It doesn't fade. It just waits to be seen again." Gala eventually gave the mosaic a name. Call it the laugh beneath us. What? Because no matter what's happening above, there's always some mischief hiding underfoot. Even Augustus seemed to agree. He avoided stepping on it and chose, instead, to sit directly beside it every day. The bench was fixed, but it never quite sat the same. And no one minded, because from then on, every time it creaked, it reminded them there's more beneath our lives than we think. Sometimes, even colour, even laughter. That night, as the lanterns dimmed and the last towel was folded, Decimus lingered by the mosaic, brushing off a stray speck of dust. He didn't say anything, but he smiled. Tonight, as you drift, think of the patterns beneath your feet, the ones you haven't found yet, and know they are waiting to be remembered. The visitor who remembered nothing, he didn't know his name, or where he came from, or why he'd walked 3 hills to get there. But when he stepped into Columbria's bathhouse, his body remembered what his mind had let go. He arrived just before dusk. Tall, thin, worn shoes, face kind, eyes foggy. A small paper tag tied to his wrist with string, the sort they use at clinics when someone cannot say much. The note read, "Name unknown, responds to warmth." And so they gave him warmth. Decimus met him at the door. Didn't ask questions, just held the door open a moment longer than usual. The kind of welcome that doesn't need a language. Gala brought him tea. Lydia offered a towel and hummed a tune from the west coast. Something old and wordless. Marcus placed a cushion on the floor, not near the bench, not away from it, just exactly where it felt right. The man said nothing, but he sat and exhaled. Long, slow, like someone had finally loosened the knot in his chest. There are memories we do not keep in our heads. We keep them in our bones, and steam has a way of drawing them out. The man's hands moved without him realizing. He brushed a stray leaf from the stone floor. He adjusted the corner of the rug by the mosaic. He tapped the wood of the bench 3 times, not in frustration, but habit. "You've been here before," Marcus said gently. No reply, just a faint smile, the kind that tries to remember what it's smiling about. They let him be. He stayed for hours, watching, sitting, breathing, listening to stories about figs and inspectors, and the infamous day the goat fell asleep in the herbs. He laughed once, a low, round sound that surprised even him. Later, as Lydia stirred the last of the evening's herbs, she handed him a slip of paper and a charcoal stub. "You don't have to write your name," she said. "Just draw what you feel." The man looked at the paper for a long time. Then, slowly, with shaking fingers, he drew a shape, a circle, a small line above it, then another, then steam. He had drawn the bathhouse, or at least the way it lived inside him. Even when the names fall away, even when time erases the edges, something in us remembers where we were safe. That night, Gala made him a sleeping nest from spare towels and old wool. They left the lantern glowing low beside him. He fell asleep with the picture folded under his palm. In the morning, he was gone. No note, no name, no shoes taken. Just a small folded towel on the bench, and next to it the drawing, with one more thing added in charcoal. A small X inside the bathhouse. That's where I felt whole, Marcus whispered. They never learned his name, but that day, the bathhouse was warmer than usual. Not by degrees, but by presence. If tonight you find yourself forgetting something important, let your body remind you of where you felt safe, of who made you laugh, of when the world slowed down just enough to feel like home again. The storm that skipped us. They said it would be the worst in 50 years. That the rivers would rise, that the roofs would shudder. But when the storm came, it passed Columbria by, and no one could explain why. It began with whispers, the kind that ride the wind ahead of thunder, the kind that carry from towns over, where shutters creaked and barrels rolled down lanes. Marius had family 3 valleys east. They sent word by foot. Tie everything down, keep the animals inside. This one is different. Columbria prepared, not with panic, but with the quiet coordination of people who know how to care for things that matter. Galla wrapped herbs in linen. Lydia stacked extra firewood near the door. Marcus built a makeshift cover for Augustus, who promptly destroyed it with a single headbutt. He prefers to test fate directly, Marcus muttered. The skies darkened. The wind picked up. And then the rain began, but only lightly, a few drops, polite and scattered. The kind that feel like small apologies on the skin. They waited, through the night, into the next day, ready for the gusts, ready for the surge, ready for windows to rattle and water to test the walls. But the storm simply passed. The sky cleared. The earth stayed dry. A single fig had fallen from the tree behind the herb rack, and Augustus ate it with no ceremony. Not every miracle is loud. Some come disguised as nothing happening at all. Lucian walked up from the low path just before midday. He looked up at the roof, down at the bricks, around at the faces. Nothing, he asked. They all shook their heads. Not even a gust, Galla said. Lucian knelt, touched the dry earth with 2 fingers, and said to no one in particular, remarkable. The other towns, they learned later, had flooding, trees down, roof tiles gone. One town's bell tower was struck by lightning rang once, and hasn't rung since. But Columbria, not a scratch. There are places that seem chosen, or maybe remembered, by something larger than weather. Of course, theories blossomed. Marius swore it was the way the valley curved, some special funneling of air. Galla believed it was the herbs. Lavender can change the mood of a room. Why not the sky? Lydia said it was the mosaic. That kind of joy sends signals to the universe. Marcus claimed it was his idea to leave out a bowl of olives as an offering. It's what the storm gods crave, brined snacks, but no one really needed an answer. They only knew. That night, when the lanterns glowed, and the floor warmed, and Decimus unwrapped the towels with his usual care, the air felt thicker, but not heavy, charged, but not loud, like gratitude had weight. They didn't celebrate. They just sat a little closer, spoke a little softer, and when the wind knocked softly once against the door, like a stranger passing by, they all paused, then smiled, then went back to being warm together. Tonight, if something heavy passed you by, if the sky threatened, but stayed blue, whisper, thank you. Even if you do not know who to thank, especially then, a map with no legend. He carried a map, but no one knew where it led. There were no words, no landmarks, just lines winding, looping, or overlapping like dreams. He said he had followed it for 40 years, and that it had finally led him here. They called him Tavius, or at least, that's what was stitched on his cloak faded embroidery. Blue thread on brown wool, like the sky over soil. He arrived just after the morning mist had burned away, holding a scroll so weathered it looked older than the empire itself. The map rolled, tied with twine, edges frayed, and the faint scent of lavender still clinging to it, though no one could say why. He asked for tea, not directions, not names, just tea, and once he was seated, towel across his lap, steam gently rising around him. He opened the map. The room grew quiet. Even Augustus stopped chewing. The map was beautiful and strange. No cities, no rivers labelled, no cardinal directions, just shapes, swirls, symbols, a pattern of dots that could have been stars or goats, a curved line marked with the outline of a fish, a sun drawn sideways, as if unsure whether it was rising or setting. Some maps aren't for finding places. They're for remembering pieces of yourself. Gala leaned in. What is it, a map of? Tavius smiled, eyes twinkling beneath thick white brows. Not what, when, they blinked. A time, Illydia asked. Several, he said. Moments I never wanted to forget. So I gave them shape, places where I felt whole, or lost, or both. Lucian arrived halfway through the explanation, looked once at the scroll, twice, then sat beside it as if it had summoned him. That looks like the coast near Eberacum, he muttered. Except, not quite, Tavius nodded. Places change when remembered. They soften, they curve toward what mattered most. Decimus asked if he could touch it. Tavius allowed it with reverence. You can't get lost in a map like this, he said, only reminded. Later that day, Marius traced one spiral on the map with his finger, then looked around the bathhouse. That spot, he whispered. That feels like here. Exactly, Tavius said. Not drawn from memory, drawn from meaning. And perhaps it was true, because more and more, as the steam rose and the lanterns warmed, people began to recognize parts of themselves on that map. Not by logic, but by feeling. Not every truth lives in sentences. Some truths are shaped like loops and lines and little suns drawn sideways. They kept the map on the bench near the mosaic, never pinned, never framed. It was understood instinctively that it should remain free to move, fold, shift like memory itself. Visitors began adding to it, not with ink, but with whispers. That bend, that's where I left my fear. That corner feels like my mother's laugh. Tavius smiled every time someone added their own meaning. You understand it better than I do now. He'd say, that means I made it right, before he left, which he did quietly. One dawn before the goat stirred, he left a note, folded into the map. No name, no signature, just words. If ever you lose your way, sit here a while. The warm places will find you again. Tonight, if you find yourself drifting, picture a map made not of roads, but of the moments that made you. And know this, some destinations are people. Some journeys begin with stillness. Segmentalitans. When the emperor came in disguise. 1. 00 words. Function. Lighten tone with respectful humor. Reflect on power, humility, and the humanity of even the highest figures. Tone. Witty, curious, gentle satire. Soft and sleep-friendly with a playful spirit. You never really expect an emperor to knock, especially not one dressed like a traveling salt merchant, and especially not when he's terrible at pretending to be someone else. He arrived just before midday. Plain cloak, dusty boots, a satchel full of nothing useful, and a fake name so obviously fake that Gala nearly laughed out loud. My name, he announced with practiced modesty, is Salinus of the Southern Vineyards. Salinus, Gala repeated, raising an eyebrow. From the vineyards? Yes, ideal in salts. Rare salts. For soaking, very ancient practice. She nodded slowly. Must be exhausting. All that salting. Decimus recognized him immediately. Not from portraits, the emperor's image wasn't common in Columbria. But from posture, you can't fake the kind of back that's held straight for 40 years. Or the way his fingers checked every doorway for threats. Or how he tried and failed to hand his shoes to someone, as if expecting a servant. Still, they let him pretend, because sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone powerful is let them rest without reminding them of who they are. Even emperors get tired of hearing their names. He soaked for over an hour, said nothing, let the steam wrap around his shoulders. Let Augustus sniff his boot without protest. At one point, he muttered. This is better than gold, Marcus replied, without looking up. That's because gold doesn't know how to breathe. When Lucian arrived and saw him, he paused mid-step, then slowly turned back toward the door. I forgot my bucket, he mumbled. The emperor caught his eye and winked. Later, over figs and barley tea, Salinus finally spoke. You've made something here, not a bath, a forgetting place. We prefer to remember. Galla said gently. But forgetting a title now and then isn't the worst thing. Before he left, he handed Decimus a small, round object wrapped in linen. For the goat, he said. Tell him I owe him a nod of respect. Inside the cloth, a carved stone medallion. The imperial seal, real, heavy, rare. And Augustus, he sat on it. Immediately, the emperor walked off without ceremony, did not say goodbye, but paused once at the corner, looked back at the steaming rooftop, and whispered, "It smells like home." That day, the towel count was one short, and we all agreed, if an emperor takes one, we let it slide. For weeks after, Silenus became a sort of legend in Columbria, not for his title, but for how long he soaked without saying a word. A new record, Lydia declared, 1 hour and 23 minutes of pure peace, and in the corner of still things, someone placed a tiny scroll, on it just a symbol, a crown floating gently on steam. Tonight, if you feel the weight of titles, even if yours is just father or neighbor or tired soul, hang it by the door, let the steam remind you, you are more than the name the world knows. The goodbye that wasn't sad. Not all goodbyes feel like endings. Some feel like passing a lantern forward, a quiet shift in the circle, a way of saying, I'll still be with you. Just not in the same chair. Lydia had been there the longest, before the walls had their second coat of paint, before the mosaic had been uncovered, before Augustus had learned to climb stairs he wasn't supposed to. She was never the loudest, never the first to speak, but her presence felt like a stone in the pocket solid, comforting, always known. So when she stood up one morning, tea in hand, and said, "It's time I wandered again," the room went still, not in shock, but in respect. "Wander where?" Marius asked. She shrugged. "Where the soil smells different, where my feet can meet a road that hasn't heard my steps yet." They didn't try to stop her. Columbria wasn't the kind of place that held people tight. It warmed them and trusted them to know when their next season had arrived. Still, they made plans, not a party Lydia hated fuss, but something simple. A slow evening, extra figs, an extra long steam, and, at her request, a joke from everyone. Marcus read his from a scroll. What did the Roman soldier say when someone stole his bath towel? "What? I'm togaless." Even Augustus groaned. Lucian offered a story of a magistrate who once confused soap with cheese and didn't notice for 2 days. Lydia laughed so hard she spilled her tea. Galla, with misty eyes, gave her a small bottle. Inside, steam water, caught from the corner near the mosaic. "So you always have this scent," she whispered. And Decimus, who had written and erased his words 10 times, finally just said, "You taught us stillness, and how to walk without fear of silence. Wherever you go, may someone be lucky enough to learn the same." Lydia didn't cry, but her voice caught just once when she replied, "Thank you for letting me stay long enough to matter." She left at dawn, towel neatly folded, shoes clean, a fig in her pocket. But before she turned down the path, she looked back at the bathhouse, raised 2 fingers in the shape of steam, and smiled. Later that morning, Decimus found something tucked into the folds of her sitting cloth. A drawing, simple, of the room, from her corner. Everyone in it, including herself, but in the picture, she had already begun to fade into mist. Not lost, just carried onward. Not all presence needs a body. Some stay with us like steam in the tiles, like warmth on skin long after the water's gone. They didn't fill her corner. They let it sit, quiet, whole, not empty, just waiting. Visitors sometimes paused there, and somehow sat straighter, spoke slower, breathed deeper, as if Lydia had left behind more than just memories, as if she had left instruction. If someone you love has gone a different way, think not of what is missing, but of what they gave that still fills the room. Tonight, close your eyes with this truth. Goodbyes can be gentle, and love, once given, doesn't leave. The heat that stays, the fire never burns all at once. It flickers, rests, rises again. And even when the steam has faded, some warmth stays in the stones. Years passed. The mosaic faded a little more, but never cracked. Augustus, slower now, still found the same patch of sun near the south wall. New towels were added. New faces came and sat where Lydia once had. And still the bathhouse breathed. Not with sound, not with steam, but with memory. Marcus eventually stopped telling jokes quite as loudly. Lucian visited less often, but always left with a full heart. Decimus, well, Decimus had grown white in the beard and deeper in the eyes, but he still opened the doors each morning, still checked the fire, still paused at the corner of the room and whispered, "Stay warm, whoever you are." They never expanded the bathhouse, never painted over the old walls, because no one ever asked for more than what it already gave. And still, people came, tired ones, joyful ones, confused ones, grieving ones. Some stayed a while, some only a night, but they all left with something under their skin. Not knowledge, not souvenirs, just stillness, the kind that settles deep and makes the world a little quieter. One day, a young girl sat beside the mosaic, maybe 6 or 7. She touched the spiral with one careful finger and asked her grandfather, "What is this place?" He paused, looked around at the fire, the benches, the wrinkles in the towels, the tiny bowl of olives Marcus still set out just in case. And he said, "It's where people remember how to be soft again." The girl thought for a long time, then whispered, "Can we come back?" "Of course." He smiled. Places like this never really close. They didn't know who built the bathhouse. Truly, not anymore. Maybe it had always been here. Maybe it was made from the same dust and story and size as every person who entered it. Some places are built from stone, some from plans, and some from the quiet agreement between strangers that peace is worth returning to. In time, the town changed. Fewer goats, more children, a bakery where the fig tree once stood, a little plaque placed outside the bathhouse, with no date, no name, just a sentence carved in gentle curves. Here, we got warm, and even long after the names had changed, after Decimus's chair was passed on, and Galla's herbs grew wild, and Augustus became the subject of local myth, the steam still rose, the silence still held, and the heat still stayed in the stones. Because Columbria was never really just a bathhouse. It was the space between heartbeats, the breath between burdens, the laugh you remember 5 days later, the moment you exhaled and did not even know why. Tonight, if you feel the pull of a place you've never been, if your chest feels a little lighter, and your eyes a little slower, maybe, just maybe, you've visited Columbria too. And when you wake, let that warmth carry you into your day, quiet, whole, and never quite alone. If you're still here with me, thank you. You've just traveled through time, not with machines or maps, but with memory, imagination, and the kind of stillness that only stories can bring. What we shared tonight wasn't just history. It was human, soft, funny, mysterious, and real. And if a part of that story stayed with you, it means this place and this time together mattered. What to do next? A gentle invitation. If you smiled, if something tugged at your heart, or if this helped you drift just a little deeper into calm, tell me. Write a word, a thought, or even just an emoji in the comments. I read them, truly, one by one. You can also follow this channel, Sleep Well Tonight, where every week we light another story, not to excite the mind, but to soften it. We're building a library of peace, one tale at a time. Sleep Well Tonight is a story-based podcast channel made for older adults, calm seekers, and anyone looking for gentle, meaningful tales to fall asleep to. Here, history is told like bedtime stories, not to test your memory, but to give it rest. With your friend Sam, a voice you can trust, stories you can feel, and silence you can finally lean into. What part of tonight's story stayed with you? Write one line about it below. I'd love to hear. If you could live in one moment from tonight's story, which would it be? Did a person from this story remind you of someone in your life? Tell us. Let the comments be your firelight. Want more stories like this? Subscribe and tap the little bell. Next week's story might be your new favorite way to fall asleep.